This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Twilight, What We Do in the Shadows, Interview with a Vampire, Buffy. I am just really fond of silly vampire media. The concept of vampires just really combines comedy and melodrama in the most deliciously palatable way. It basically results in the most self-serious characters ever behaving like total imbeciles, and I eat it up every time. To me, one of the most interesting things about a vampire popping up in a piece of media is all of the implied history behind that character. Usually the vampires we meet are centuries old and have lived through drastic changes in social standards and technology, which both lays the groundwork for a character history that will inevitably intrigue us, and also creates characters that are completely out of time and can't comprehend the concept of email. I've been wanting to create my own silly little group of vampires for a while now, and after Pinterest recently accosted me with videos of bats eating fruit in the most adorable way possible, I think that I finally found my muse. So obviously a lot of bats in the US have a diet consisting mostly of insects, but a lot of bats around the world are actually frugivores, and I don't know if that's actually how you say that word. But I thought that it would be fun and cute if I designed a group of vampires based on some preferred bat fruits. So the fruits that I will be using today are figs, dates, mangoes, bananas, and strawberries. And strawberries are not at all a fruit that bats eat on a regular basis, but it is a fruit that I eat on a regular basis. So I wanted to do it. And in my defense, may I also present to you evidence A, this one video I found of a bat eating a strawberry. And since I also really like the cheesy nature of vampires being able to turn into bats, I also paired each fruit with a different type of bat so that I have even more visual inspiration for these characters. And the variation in bat species is fairly subtle between the distinction of microbat and megabat, but today I am going to be using the eastern red bat, the common vampire bat, the little brown bat, the giant golden crown flying fox, and the masked flying fox. In terms of my inspo boards, I definitely leaned a lot into historical inspirations for these characters because to me that's a big part of the concept of vampirism, being stuck in the past, unable to mature, and even having a tendency towards regression. So each of the characters are kind of stuck in an old era whenever it comes to their fashion sense. It might not be the specific era that they were turned in, but maybe they picked an era along the way and decided to stick with it. Or maybe even some of those fashions had come back into style in their lifetime because we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence of 17 and 1800s fashion on the runway right now. So I'm thinking some of the characters probably have a little bit of mixing and matching of eras going on as well. So some of the historical inspirations are early and late Victorian era, 1700s, 1910s, and even 1970s and 80s with a little historical remixing in there where things have gotten diluted or revised by trends revisiting them. A lot of these eras are definitely all over the place, but I still tried to give my inspirations a little bit of a gothic flair to hopefully still make them feel like a unified group. In significantly shorter terms, the general prompt here is a colony of vampires living and feeding in a dystopian future while trying to avoid being discovered as vampires. So now that I've laid all of that groundwork and I kind of know where I'm going with these characters, as usual, I'm going to start out roughing in some of the designs with some thumbnails. I usually start out with basic full body colored thumbnails for these videos, but this time I ended up doodling a lot in my sketchbook first to nail down the vibes. I began with a super rough silhouette sketch to get a decent idea of group height dynamics and play around with shapes a little bit. Next I did something very unconventional for me, which is beginning with facial sketches of my characters. I don't think I have ever done this before, but I wanted to experiment with fun exaggerated facial structures for some of the characters since vampires tend to have more dramatic appearances, and this really helped me to nail down some of the characterization early on. It also helped me to work some bat-like facial features into the designs, which was a lot of fun. From there, I did sketchy thumbnails in my sketchbook to play around with wardrobe a little bit, and then I finally switched over to digital and refined my wardrobe sketches on my iPad with some color and the power of the undo button. Writing up character profiles for these guys from the beginning helped me to get rough designs that I liked pretty quickly for a change. I also gave them distinctive color palettes that match their corresponding fruit, and I've also gotten really into associating specific textures and fabrics with my character designs lately, so I also mentally associated strawberry with pleats, eyelet lace and plaid, figs with shears, beading and embroidery, dates with taffeta, silk and leather, banana with wool, cotton and ivory, and mango with linen, velvet and fur. I was really feeling the vibes with these character designs, so I even made a Spotify playlist with a bunch of songs that relate to the little backstories that I thought up for them. I know this episode is particularly unhinged, but I was having fun. so if you want to listen to it, it's also linked below. I was pretty darn happy with how these designs were coming along at this point, but if I had one critique, I wanted to push the fruit aspect a little bit more. Maybe not for banana, his was pretty on the nose, but I think I can push the others a little bit further. Given the silly vampire nature of this video, I have a feeling these are going to be some of my favorite character designs that I've worked on in a while, and I show off my favorite character designs using this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the best way that I've found to display my illustration portfolio and other artwork all in one place. Building a website is made extremely simple with their flexible website templates that are made to accommodate every kind of website niche you may need, whether you're a podcaster, videographer, or illustrator like me. From there, creating a visual portfolio is as simple as uploading your folder of pieces, and then Squarespace does the rest by organizing them into a beautiful gallery for you. Squarespace's process can be as hands-on or hands-off as you want it to be, because Squarespace's website builder, Fluid Engine, allows you to customize your pages using convenient templates and drag-and-drop features. Something I'm slowly working on right now is grouping all of the character designs that I've done for the channel into character profiles so that you can read up on the lore and have a condensed place to reference all of the characters that I've done in these videos. And with just one more click on the navigation bar, you can access my online store where you can buy prints of the pieces in my portfolio and character profiles, because Squarespace also offers an e-commerce platform where you can sell physical goods, digital media, and even services like classes. And Squarespace also makes it super easy to sell physical goods with their custom merch. All you have to do is design your products, and the rest, production, inventory, and shipping, are handled for you, which is great if you still want to offer merch but you don't have time to manage a full store yourself. So if you want to create your very own website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/PricklyAlpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for once again sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. So my vampire lore for this group borrows from a bunch of different well-known vampire lore and popular media. Just think, if it is a well-known piece of vampire lore, it applies to these characters. But on top of that, I have also added a few of my own rules, which are either things that apply now because these vampires are based on fruit, or things that are just important to the later lore that I felt I needed to list here.
Before we begin, there are a couple of things you'll need to know. Vampirism is the curse of losing your soul and giving in to unfettered want. Vampires lack the ability to act altruistically and always have a selfish motivation. Even when showing concern for a member of their colony, the primary interest is still in their survival, the strength and numbers that will secure their next meal. A vampire's primary motivation and fixation at the time of being turned will be their main motivation and focus after becoming a vampire. Vampires are incapable of developing new beliefs, understanding new complex concepts, or mentally maturing past the age of being turned. When a vampire is first sired, they will have a fresh, insatiable bloodlust. Once their bloodlust subsides by feeding on their first human, it will be replaced by an insatiable hunger for a particular fruit. Oftentimes, it will be their favorite fruit from their human life, a last shred of humanity screaming through the veil of lost personhood. This fruit is the only human food they're able to consume without a heinous slew of blood and bile purging the foreign substance from their system. This fruit is an obsession. It weeds its way into every facet of a vampire's new identity: sustenance, clothing, interests. It's even believed by some vampires that eating enough of your fruit will cure your vampirism while allowing you to retain your immortality, though through the centuries, this hunger has never faded. One thing is certain: failing to consume enough fruit will drive a vampire mad in the same way a lack of blood will, contorting them into a creature devoid of all the beauty and magnetism of a vampire, a truly undesirable state. When low on fruit or blood, vampires can transform into a bat and survive for a longer period of time before going mad. If a vampire goes hungry, they'll progressively lose their mind until they're turned into a monstrous creature that seems halfway between a vampire and the demon who possesses them. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, there are several taboos that could jeopardize the few appealing aspects of life as a vampire. There are the usual rules: don't make friends with humans or take them as lovers, only sire one new vampire per century, honor the territories of other supernaturals, and protect those within your colony. Breaking any of these would be consequential. However, worse crimes exist. Vampires should never slay other vampires. Vampires should never drink human blood from one of their own. And it is considered taboo to turn a child, a human less than 20, into a vampire. Impurity is the defining characteristic of vampire kind, so the innate purity of children prevent them from completing the full transformation. If turned returned, they exist forever in limbo, neither human nor vampire. Their bloodlust is insatiable, but their soul is still partially intact. This loyalty to humanity proves to be inconvenient to a colony. If a vampire commits a taboo, such as turning a child, a further degree of vampirism will fully overtake them, contorting their body into a grotesque, malformed beast, more bat than humanoid, lacking reason and killing indiscriminately. All the luster of its former beauty and charisma will vanish, along with all the memories of its human and vampire lives. What remains is a husk for a demon and furious instinct. At this point, it will only be able to feed on human blood processed through its own kind. This beast will forever thirst for the bloodline it previously sired. It will chase its former colony relentlessly, attempting to feed on them. This beast can only be slayed by its own offspring. Unfortunately, this is always a difficult task. After a vampire commits a taboo, it is the responsibility of the offspring to slay it before it contorts into a gargoyle, the mindless beast that threatens the survival of its former colony. If the colony fails to slay a vampire before it fully transforms, it will become much more difficult. If a gargoyle feeds on its offspring after turning, it will grow significantly more powerful. Of course, if a child is allowed to be sired by a vampire, it must also be killed by the colony along with its sire. Humanity has no place in the world of the undead. So first up, we have a character that I ended up naming Eevee or Evelyn, and she is based on the mango and the masked flying fox. I usually like it whenever you guys come up with names for the characters in these videos, but this week I ended up just thinking of names that I liked for all of them, so that's what I'm going to roll with in this episode. So Eevee is both the oldest living character in this colony referring to their little group of vampires that have been kind of sired by each other. That is directly taken by the word colony referring to a group of bats, and the character that most of the little plot backstory that I came up with centers around. So as I established in the intro, this setting is kind of like a dystopian alternate universe that's like loosely steampunk inspired. I'm thinking this society is kind of an offshoot from our own, where the Industrial Revolution kicks up and advances begin to be made, but then everything kind of plateaus and history ends up going in a very different direction for several hundred years. And this aesthetic, I feel like everything is about revisiting and remixing the past over and over and over again, so everything becomes a conglomerate, derivative copy of itself, kind of. Like, for example, in terms of the architecture and fashion sense of this world, we haven't really seen the developments that happened like post-1920s in our world happen in this world. In this world, the architecture and fashions that get recycled are kind of just condensed between like the 1500s and 1900s in our world. And admittedly, yeah, that is mostly so that everything in this universe can be hundreds of years removed from like our actual history, but still feel and look old-timey. But I also like how this plays on the theme of regression and stagnation and how that overlaps with vampirism itself. So there's a little bit of a method to my madness here. It's about the themes. It's about the gothic aesthetics, you understand. So getting back to Eevee and her backstory and characterization, I feel like in her previous life before she became a vampire, she was an actress and a singer. Maybe she did opera. I think her career was pretty financially successful for her. I think she had a fiance, she had a family. She falls into the category of these characters who definitely would not want to give up her happy life to become a vampire. And then along came a particular vampire who I will for now call Hargreaves, who took all of that away from her. I think Hargreaves fixated on Eevee and decided to turn her because he enjoyed her performances and kind of developed a parasocial relationship with her. And even though she was a human, he wanted to like protect her and get to know her. It's like a very twisted, creepy thing. I mean, obviously Hargreaves is a vampire, but even as vampires go, not a good dude. So after being turned, I think since Eevee was an actress and a singer and very connected to her friends and other people in her life, her primary motivation as a vampire would be that sort of connection. The things that the vampires fixate on are almost unfinished business for a ghost. The kind of connection she had with people before, she can never really get that again. So that's constantly what she's chasing, but she can't connect with people anymore. They're people. She's a vampire. So instead, this longing for connection kind of surfaces in her feeding technique. Some of the lore that I have for these characters kind of like falls on the darker side of things and less on the like funny, silly side of things. It's just how this episode ended up going. So in my version of vampires, I think that their unfinished business, quote unquote, their obsession, fixation, kind of translates to how they like to feed on people once they become vampires. It's basically the way that they like to play with their food, to put it very bluntly. So for Eevee, she likes to hunt in the upper echelon social circles. She's very socially confident and socially competent, and she likes to get to know her victims, establish a connection, and then betray them and eat them. Again, pretty dark and gruesome, but these are kind of behaviors that these characters are cursed with. Since they lack the moral compass of a soul, they can't interpret how cruel their actions are. They can only want for things, oftentimes things that they could have experienced in their past lives, like connection, friendships, love, but now they can only experience those things in this new, distorted state, which unfortunately drives Eevee to develop a more familial connection with Hargreaves. I think Hargreaves very much sees Eevee as a daughter. That's sort of his unfinished business. He was never able to have children in his past life, so instead, he creates them. More on that later. In terms of personality, like I said, Eevee is the oldest living character in the group. That makes her feel very responsible for all of the other members of the group, so she has a lot of very motherly tendencies. She likes to take care of people. Like I said earlier, she's also very socially confident and competent, so she kind of keeps up with the times a little bit more than the rest of the characters, and she's better at understanding humans and their motivations and why they do the things that they do, while some of the other characters can be pretty detached and clueless whenever it comes to humanity. Her understanding of humanity is, of course, aided by the fact that she spends the most time talking to people and making friends with them, albeit before eating them, but this gives her way more of a perspective into their world and helps them to blend in with society a lot easier. Eevee is also the one who is most likely to get close to breaking the taboos of making friends with humans or taking one of them as a lover, because that is what she basically does, only she kills them before it gets too far. It's a cruel existence for Eevee, especially before the rest of her colony comes along. You'll hear about the rest of the colony throughout the rest of the video, but in terms of design for Eevee, I wanted to do something that was very like glamorous, fashionable, something that would really help her to blend in if she's like hunting in the upper echelon of society, pretending to be a socialite. And oddly enough, style inspirations for her character ended up being Rose from the Titanic and Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village. Since I was playing around with different time periods and I already had like other feminine characters in this group with more Victorian silhouettes, I wanted to maybe shoot for 1910s with this look. It's not a silhouette that I usually go for with my character designs, but it's something that I've gotten more of a fascination with because I've stumbled across some really cool 1910s looks on my Pinterest boards. So for her, I paired a 1910s feeling evening dress with some accessories that look very glamorous, old Hollywood. I gave her a big old sun hat because naturally as a vampire you want to keep that skin as far away from the sun as possible. I gave her long opera gloves because once again, opera references. I gave her like a little mink stool because I think that's also very like classic Hollywood. And then all the little decorations on her dress are sort of me playing into the idea of that historical remixing a little bit. I tried to go mostly in terms of decorations for things that would feel a little bit more Baroque or Rococo. I think you see some decorative elements like this in 1910s fashion, but I did want to make this look kind of feel like it's been pieced together all over the place and there's not like one direct historical reference happening. I also made sure to make the look mostly orange and yellows, of course, to reference the mango, and I even have some like little mango decorations hanging off of her skirt in some points, and also some like layers of mango inspired beading around her neck. And with Eevee's outfit and also all of the other outfits that I did, I made sure to add some references to like bat wings, like little sharp segmented bits, and just little nods to their bat identity. Like she's got a little bat symbol on her cane. I also made it so there's some kind of bat reference happening with all of the characters' hair, so that's why I have some little pigtails sticking up for her. And of course, all of the characters also have red eyes to kind of imply their vampirism, and most of them also have little fangs sticking out, just because I think that it's just, you know, a stupid, cute way to convey a vampire identity. Through this process, I definitely struggled to get her where I wanted her to be, but by the end, I am very happy with her character design. Next up, we have a character that I am calling Ruby, who is of course inspired by the Eastern red bat and strawberries. Ruby is the character who was sired second out of the group and was also sired by Hargreaves. However, Ruby was sired at the age of 14, which means that through her, Hargreaves only created a half vampire. Siring a half vampire is of course one of the most severe taboos a vampire can commit, so things didn't exactly go well for Hargreaves after this. I'll share a little bit more about that monster later on, but before becoming a vampire, Ruby was just an ordinary child. She went to a prominent girls' school. She was particularly gifted with music. She played sports like tennis, basketball, and swimming. And most importantly, she had a loving family and good friends. Everything changed whenever she and the choir at her girls' school performed at the local theater, and Hargreaves saw the opportunity to sire another idealized daughter. Hargreaves knew the risks and the consequences of siring a half vampire, but you see, Hargreaves was also an arrogant bastard. At this point, he was one of the oldest vampires living in what we would recognize as Europe, and he had gained a reputation for being one of the most powerful vampires in existence. He felt untouchable, and in that way, he thought that the rules probably wouldn't apply to him. So the driving force of his unfinished business won out, and he created another daughter. Of course, the rules did apply to Hargreaves. He reaped the consequences and had to go away. At this point, it was technically Eevee's responsibility to slay both Hargreaves and Ruby, but that little thing inside her that sought connection more than anything else just wouldn't let her do it. So at that point, Eevee gained a sister. I think that Eevee basically views Ruby as this shred of redemption, this literal shred of humanity that she can cling to. Taking care of Ruby is the last good thing that she can do with her existence as a vampire. So even though it's a taboo, even though other vampires would kill Ruby on sight if they knew she was a half vampire, Eevee still takes Ruby in and makes her a part of the colony. So a couple of bits about half vampires as I imagine them in my universe. That initial insatiable bloodlust that a vampire experiences when they're first turned, for a half vampire that never really fades. However, as their cravings go, their craving for fruit is a little bit more overwhelming than their craving for blood. So over time, Ruby kind of discovers that she can offset her hunger for blood a little bit by just gorging herself on strawberries. I think as vampires go, half vampires also have a lot more of a sweet tooth, so they prefer humans with sweeter blood or higher blood sugar. Vampire children are kind of sugar addicts in the same way human children are, I guess. In terms of unfinished business or her driving goal, her unfinished business is kind of her life as a human being, because that part of her has not fully died. It hasn't fully gone away because she didn't complete a full vampire transformation, so that kind of surfaces in her hunting style as her absolutely sucking at hunting. Her predator style is thinking about biting someone and getting nauseous and then just not being able to do it. Ruby in her current state is very much not cut out for this at all, so she usually has to have someone come along with her and help her hunt. Usually that person is Fig, you'll meet them later on. The ominous pose that I have her in this drawing with her walking forward with the knives may have you thinking that she is violent and dangerous, when in reality she just has to have some knives with her to help her hunt, because she gets physically disgusted whenever she thinks about biting into a human being with her teeth. When Fig is with her, they'll usually harvest the blood for her and put it in a little jar so that she can drink it whenever she's removed from the dead body, so it's less gross for her. As you can imagine, Ruby just overall definitely struggles with the idea of killing people and drinking their blood. She finds it to be really distasteful, and because of that reason, she often feels like an outsider within the group, and that's basically because she is. Even though she's a half vampire, she still has part of her soul intact. intact, that means she has a partial moral compass intact. And the longer the group is with Ruby, they keep discovering a lot of other human traits that she still has intact. Ruby has the ability to learn new ideas and grow mentally. She isn't stuck in the past. She isn't fixated on any one particular thing. And eventually they realize that even though her aging has slowed down, her body also has the ability to age and grow. I'm thinking the group at first doesn't really know that Ruby's a half vampire. They know something's a little off about her because she struggles to drink blood and she's just a little too compassionate towards their victims, but they definitely get a little bit more tipped off whenever her height begins to grow. Eevee expects the group to react poorly to this because she let a half vampire live and she was technically supposed to kill it, but Nigel, as you'll find out, is a weird guy who's obsessed with science, so he takes a weird liking to Ruby because he thinks this whole phenomenon is fascinating. Fig doesn't care much one way or another, they just hope that Ruby doesn't get taller than them one day. And Elaine on the surface acts like a stickler for the rules, but she secretly likes it because she's someone who left grandchildren behind in her life as a human. So in a way, it feels like she may be able to watch one of her grandchildren grow up. So despite her half vampire origin, Ruby's dynamic with the group is surprisingly wholesome. Everyone ends up being very protective of her and takes on some kind of familial role. Nigel takes on the role of group dad or like weird group uncle, so he likes to play with her and hang out in kind of a juvenile way because he doesn't know how to relate to a child who's a teenager. Fig and Ruby are total bros and get along very well, doing lots of mischief and getting into trouble. They have a big sibling dynamic and love to annoy the older members of the group. And Elaine, of course, very much takes on a grandparent role. She can be both a strict disciplinarian whenever Fig and Ruby are getting into trouble, and a source of love and comfort. Elaine loves to tell Ruby stories about her children and grandchildren whenever she's trying to fall asleep. In terms of personality, obviously whenever she first becomes a vampire, I think that she's very shy and understated. She probably doesn't talk much. She is very untrusting, understandably so, but I think the longer she spends in the group, the more that personality kind of develops and comes into its own. Fig definitely is sort of a terrible influence on her. Fig helps her to develop a sharp, deadpan sarcasm that Elaine doesn't approve of at all. And I think she would also begin asking a lot of questions about history and about the world, specifically to Nigel. As a child with that limited knowledge of the world, I think she understands Nigel's thirst for information and new discoveries. And of course, her relationship to Eevee is very much that of an older sister and a mentor. Eevee is the one who understands her situation and her past the most. She also understands what it's like to get turned by Hargreaves. I think as Ruby slowly grows and matures, Eevee helps her to understand her place in the world as both a human and a vampire. I think as Ruby grows and matures, she also develops an obsession with becoming fully human again. There are legends about eating enough fruit and specific fruit restoring your humanity and curing your vampirism, and she is determined to find out whether or not they're real. I think a distant future arc for Ruby would be whenever she's biologically kind of in her 20s, she may split from the group and go on a quest for a while to see if she can cure her vampirism. I know I've been talking for a long time here, but in terms of the actual character design itself, I of course very heavily leaned into the use of strawberries in this design. A vampire's favorite fruit is an obsession. They're aesthetically very enamored by it, so I think Ruby would really express that in her fashion sense. I think that Elaine would help make Ruby's outfits and come up with little cute designs for her and find different ways to incorporate the fruit into the design. So this is probably just one outfit out of many, but I think one of the many human traits that Ruby still has is that she still feels and is susceptible to the cold in the way that the others might not be. Vampires are kind of these cold-blooded creatures, but Ruby really feels it. Like, she gets cold to the bone, so I'm thinking that she wears a lot of very warm outfits. So for this one, she has a quilted capelet with puff sleeve, both inspired by strawberries and bat wings. It's quilted down with beading to kind of give it that strawberry seed appearance. The capelet is of course also adorned with some little strawberry ties draping from it, and underneath she also has a matching dress. It's made up of layers of draping fabrics to keep her warm, and the skirt underneath has the same plaid strawberry inspired design from the capelet. She also has mittens to keep her hands nice and warm, and as far as bat references go, I tried to use lots of sharp shapes in all of the ruffles, and I also gave her two little bat clips coming out of her hair. Finally, I gave her her a little cloak that is draping along behind her, because I figured that since these characters are vampires and they try to stay out of the sun, I would try to give all of the characters something that they can kind of use to shield themselves from the sun if they have to be close to a window or briefly outside for some reason whenever it's daylight. And with that very long ramble, that's Ruby. Next up we have Nigel, who ended up being one of my favorite characters out of the group. And of course he is inspired by bananas and the giant golden-crowned flying fox. As you could see in kind of the sketching thumbnailing portion, I had a lot of fun designing his face and also his like weird banana cloak. But Nigel is the third oldest member of the little colony. He was turned by Eevee as the first vampire that she sired, and so his role of the group kind of falls into the like platonic group dad. I imagine that he's the kind of character that's pretty mellow. He's just a bro. He's tall and awkward. He's not very self-aware. He's got that himbo energy. So he has relatively low conflict with the other members of the group and tends to be just kind of chill. Though at the same time, he is also very, very tall and imposing. So whenever it comes to the two kids out of the group kind of misbehaving, he is definitely able to set them in line. I think a fun dynamic for him would be super nice and chill within the group, but then outside of the group to humans, he is just an absolute murderous fiend. I think his nonchalant attitude towards mundane things would also extend to his moral compass and his attitude towards feeding and humans in general, and he just doesn't really care. The whole concept of being soulless for him doesn't necessarily register in terms of him being vindictive to people. He doesn't necessarily want to hurt them, but he doesn't understand that they feel pain. He generally just sees human beings as food, and that's more or less it, so that sets up this dichotomy between a character who seems pretty kind and chill towards the members of his group and can even pretend to be that way towards humans in order to, like, you know, trick them down a dark alley. And that's contrasted heavily by his attitude of seeming very cold and detached and ruthless towards human beings and killing and that sort of thing. Of course, he's still perfectly capable of showing empathy and compassion towards the members of his group, but the core motivation there is still out of preservation for this group that can hunt in numbers and ensure the survival of all of the vampires within the group. In his human life, I'm thinking that Nigel ended up feeling very aimless in his middle age. I'm thinking that he was probably late 40s whenever he got turned into a vampire. I think his passion in his human life was the pursuit of history and science, and maybe he lived in a time period where historical and scientific advances had kind of plateaued. It was difficult to make advances. It was difficult to have resources to be able to study. So I'm thinking whenever Eevee first started stalking him and befriending him, she very much saw him as food, but the more she got to know him and the more they started talking, the more he would convey how sad he was that he couldn't see the future of science and technology and all of these things, and how not that much progress had been made in his lifetime, and he just wanted to pursue knowledge. So when the time came for Eevee to actually feed on him, I'm thinking she gave him the option for her to turn him into a vampire so that he can live for thousands of years and see all the scientific progress that he so desperately wanted to see. And with someone that didn't have much they were leaving behind, I think that he enthusiastically agreed. So I think Nigel would definitely be one of the only characters in this group who wanted to become a vampire. I think that also translates to his unfinished business, his fixation, as well as his feeding style. In terms of his fixation and unfinished business, he kind of doesn't have any. His unfinished business is life. It's science. It's seeing all of the things that happen as the years pass him, and that's something that he can finally do as a vampire. In terms of his feeding technique, I think for the most part, it presents itself in apathy. He doesn't think much about feeding on people. It's not vindictive. It's not particularly cruel. It's just food. I think the part that he mostly cares about is having a free cadaver after his meal. As a man of science, I think he likes to study people after he kills them. He likes to analyze their organs, their ailments, odd peculiarities that have to do with that one particular person. And that way, I think that Nigel has a little bit of mad scientist energy to him as well. And as a man of science, I think he's also very intrigued by the existence of vampirism itself. I think his studies are partially a desperate way to figure out how vampirism works on a scientific level. It's not something that can can be explained through science, but he really wants to make it make sense. And that way also, I think Nigel would love to get his hands on the dead body of a vampire, but of course, killing another vampire as a vampire is taboo. So on the rare occasion that a vampire does die, I think that he would be all over that body, trying to study it, trying to figure out how all this stuff works. In terms of personality, like I mentioned earlier, he's very oblivious. He's very fixated on his studies and his readings and his works. He sort of has a very surface level read of the social dynamics within his colony, and also has a very straightforward, pragmatic approach to conflict resolution and problem solving. He's also a very level-headed character. He does not get angry often, so he doesn't always understand why other people are so angry whenever they get angry. Like, this man truly just exists for the studies and the vibes. In terms of the relationship dynamics within the group, like I said, I feel like he has a very weird uncle relationship with Ruby. He loves to show her things, he loves to teach her things. Truthfully, I think he just likes a captive audience who will actually listen to him talk about his interests, and she is genuinely very interested, so he loves that. The rest of the members of the group are very much like, yeah, Nigel, that's cool, we know about the fall of Rome, but Ruby's genuine interest in his history and his dead bodies definitely makes him have a soft spot for her. I think he also has a soft spot for Elaine. In life, I think that his grandmother was the last person that he really lost before moving on into vampirism. And for Elaine, she also had an adult son who was a bumbling academic, so Nigel kind of reminds her of him. Elaine and Nigel also have a shared love of history and culture and the finer things in life, so they have some shared interests there that they can actually have conversations about. I think Fig and Eevee, as the more outgoing social members of the group, are the people that Nigel doesn't relate to as much, but he still gets along with them just fine. Nigel and Eevee are kind of the default parental members of the group, so they're constantly teaming up to make important decisions about safety and food and shelter and that sort of thing. The two also often have to be disciplinarians for the kids because the kids be pulling some pranks. Specifically, I think Nigel and Fig have a very genuine friendship and camaraderie between them, but Nigel is also an older, gullible man, and Fig is a little bit more current on the culture, so Fig is constantly trying to mess with Nigel and convince him of stupid lies, and usually he believes them. Finally, in terms of design, I had so much fun with Nigel because I practically put this man in just a banana jacket. With these characters, I really wanted to aim for stereotypical vampire fashion, but make it fruit. Give it bright pastel colors. I wanted to make it very camp because I feel like that's what would play best with the fruit theme, and I was not wrong. As his main showstopper garment, I designed this banana cloak for him with these big old pointy shoulders and a high collar and big old drapey banana sleeves. I basically wanted to make it look like a banana was peeling open and his legs and torso were emerging out of the banana peel. When you wear this cloak, you are the banana. As I mentioned before, I also gave him big old drapey cloak and sleeves so that in the event that he is in the way of the sun, he can kind of shield himself with that. I accessorized this whole banana look with a coat and breeches and stockings and shoes that are loosely inspired by 1700s fashion, but of course a banana version of 1700s fashion because they also all have buttons on them and little details that are supposed to look like sliced banana. I completed the look with a roughly collar cravat thing that is also adorned with another banana slice. And my favorite part of this character is probably the weird facial structure and facial hair that I gave him. I just leaned all the way in whenever I thought, vampire, bat, what would this guy look like? I think that this is a pretty solid translation of like a giant golden crown flying fox or whatever the heck. And of course, in terms of specific bat references, I kind of made his hair point up in the back into a weird cowlick that sort of looks like bat ears. And I imagine whenever he sticks out the banana sleeves of his coat, they kind of fall into the shape of bat wings. And folks, that is Nigel. He is so strange and I love him. Next up we have Fig, who is of course course, based on the combination of the common vampire bat and the fruit figs. I feel like Fig is just a really cute nickname, and it felt like it fit for this character, so I decided to keep it. So Fig is kind of the epitome of taking full advantage of all of the perks of vampirism. In Fig's human life before becoming a vampire, they were an acrobat, a circus performer, and a stunt person. They loved performing and doing dangerous things, particularly for the thrill of it all. They of course appreciated the artistry and the performative nature of something like that. But more than anything, Fig is very much an adrenaline junkie. So Fig was not necessarily unhappy in their old life, but they had experienced basically all it had to offer. And when Nigel finally decided to sire someone and made an offer to Fig to turn them into a vampire instead of Nigel's next meal, Fig was intrigued by a new rush and a new state of life that they hadn't already experienced. So they, like Nigel, enthusiastically accepted the offer. And this act of sort of extending an offer to people on whether they want to become a vampire or not is sort of Eevee's new policy for this colony to prevent things that happened to herself and Ruby from happening to other people. Of course, if they don't accept the offer, it's likely that they'll instead get eaten, but Eevee thinks that's better than losing your soul without your permission. So after becoming a vampire, Fig's fixation is very much on adrenaline and feelings and experience, which is very much something that pops up in their feeding habits, because what Fig likes to do is chase people to get their adrenaline up and their heart pumping before they feed on them. Much like their background as a circus performer and acrobat, their feeding habits have a very performative, theatrical nature to them. A lot of the other vampires think it's pretty weird. In terms of personality, Fig is very much young at heart. They were 22 whenever they were turned, but they still maintain a lot of that delinquent teen troublemaker energy. They're kind of a bit of a punk and a mess. They love to pull pranks and mouth off and goof off. They have a pretty strong aversion to responsibility and caution because to them, being a vampire is all about fun and getting to do whatever you want to do. Granted, they don't know that a giant demon creature is constantly pursuing the group. If they knew about that, that would probably have a little bit of an impact on them because they have quite a protective streak whenever it comes to Ruby. Fig also very much expands their interests after becoming a vampire. As a vampire, they gain a lot of speed and agility, which enhances their acrobatic performance. I feel like they definitely find some kind of vampire supernatural circus or something like that and still put on performances and shows for other vampires. To Fig, it doesn't seem like there's very many negatives to being a vampire besides the family at the circus that they left behind. Fig very much lives in the moment, so this isn't something that they thought about too much before accepting the offer, but it is something that sometimes weighs on them now. Despite this, Fig does eventually develop some new familial attachments from within the colony. They clash with Elaine at first because Elaine just cannot handle their delinquent, rebellious energy, but Elaine just has a soft spot for kids, and when Fig isn't being chaotic and bouncing off the walls, Elaine actually finds them to be pretty charming. Eevee also has a tendency to mother Fig. Fig gets caught up in all of the cool parts of being a vampire, like running fast and climbing things and having agility, that sometimes they actually forget to eat fruit and feed, so Eevee has to check in and do the mom thing, like, have you eaten enough recently? Have you eaten? Are you okay? In the same way, Fig has a tendency to do the child thing by checking in with Eevee whenever she seems stressed to try to calm her down. Fig also likes to go out hunting with Nigel because they both have like a very blunt, sort of violent feeding technique. And Fig also, of course, likes to take Ruby to the circus to show off, and will convince her to try to do increasingly outrageous stunts with their vampire powers. In terms of design, I wanted to give Fig an outfit befitting of someone who performs in the circus, and specifically inspired by a lot of like stunt performer outfits that I have seen in the past. It's giving Elvis, it's giving Evel Knievel, it's giving Prince. The soul of Fig's character and overall look is of course very Prince inspired. That's one of the main things that inspired the ruffly shirt, the use of roses and applique. Those are all things that I think of whenever I think of Prince's performance outfits. And of course all of the beading and the applique and the details is also heavily inspired by what a fig looks like whenever you slice it open. It's got lots of seeds and texture and goop in there, so I feel like beading and embroidery and applique was a good way to reference reference that visually. I also tried to mirror that in the overall shape of the blouse that's going on here, sort of with the like light outside edges sort of fading into that deep red. It's not a one-to-one visual comparison, obviously, but it is something that I thought about. In terms of bat references, there's not a ton of overt ones here, and to reiterate, like, I'm not trying to do like a one-to-one translation of the bat into these character designs. They were really more influential whenever I was coming up with like builds and facial structures and just general vibes. But I once again obviously leaned into the bat motifs with the hairstyle that they've got going on here, and I also tried to bring that bat shape into the top of the sleeves, and then also with the cape that's flowing off of their shoulders. And once again, that cape is there so that they have something to guard them from sunlight. And with that, Fig is complete, and this is another character design that I really like from this video. Finally, we have Elaine, who is based on the combination of the little brown bat and dates. Elaine is the newest addition to the group, but she is the oldest biologically in human years, a fact that she reminds her younger, less experienced peers of on a regular basis. In her life as a human, Elaine was the lady of an estate. She was married to an influential husband, she had adult children, and then she had grandchildren. In her older age, she was working as a governess for a noble woman's child, and also running and operating her estate while her husband was away on important political business. She runs a tight, organized ship, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't get stressed out and overwhelmed sometimes. She had her vices, as everyone does, and I think on a particularly stressful night, she decides to go gambling in one of her favorite less than legal places. This is where she of course encounters Fig and Nigel, engaging in some gambling and debauchery. As they play a few rounds of blackjack, they listen to her complain about all of the stressors in her life, all of the duties, and how overwhelming they can be, how much pressure is on her on a daily basis. And Fig, being the newbie that they are, unfortunately takes this as a sign that she would probably want to be turned into a vampire to relieve her of all of the stress and responsibility. So after confronting her and gives her a very hypothetical, non-specific speech that sounds something like, if you could leave all that responsibility and stress behind, would you ever want to? If you could just do whatever you wanted all day, play poker all day, smoke all day, wouldn't you want to? She, of course, on this stressed night of blowing off steam, says hypothetically, yes, I would love to shirk my responsibilities and just do what I want all the time. And Fig unfortunately takes that as her agreeing to leave her happy life behind to become a vampire and turns her. Elaine is understandably completely blindsided and shocked by her transformation. She doesn't take it well at all, and Eevee is furious at Fig that they would turn someone in such a careless way. But they meant well. They didn't know what it was like to have a rich life like Elaine did whenever they were a human. Elaine joining the group shakes things up a lot, but what other option does she really have at this point? It takes Elaine years to really communicate with the group or even have any level of acquaintance with them. She watches her children and grandchildren grow up without her. She watches her husband and children take on the responsibilities of their life and position alone without her. She hates being a vampire and would have never in a million years willingly, knowingly chosen this for herself. Elaine's fixation and unfinished business kind of centers around order and obsession and cleanliness. It's basically the idea of duty and regret in some ways as well. All of these things that she should be doing, wishes she could be doing in her past life, surfacing in some kind of tangible way in her new life as a vampire. And the way that surfaces in her feeding is this high society ritualism that she gives to it. Elaine is an extremely picky eater. She only likes to feed on people of the upper crust and high society, people who have some kind of great talent, people who have some kind of notoriety. She treats drinking their blood like it's a wine tasting, only drinking out of a glass and at a table with full place settings, trying to maintain as much of the order and culture of her old life as possible. In a way, it's her taking revenge on the society that demanded so much from her that it made her accidentally wish away her family. Elaine's life as a vampire is pretty tragic, but eventually there are silver linings here and there. She meets some other vampires with noble backgrounds, some of which are are people she used to know that she can socialize with that aren't part of the group of people who turned her. Eventually, she begins to see Ruby as a new grandchild, and even recognizes the strength and authority that Eevee has over the group. She warms up to Nigel because she has an idiot son who's obsessed with cartography. Nigel's obsession with science reminds her of him. And eventually, she even learns to stop hating Fig, and even grows a little bit of an affection for them. She stops seeing Fig as the monster who turned her, and begins to see them as just a kid who lacks guidance and didn't really understand what they were doing. She decides to be that source of guidance instead of continuing to resent Fig. Eevee and Nigel have never raised children, but she has, so sometimes she sees their authority as weak and ineffective, and sometimes it's necessary for her to step in and actually keep the kids in line. Elaine is never particularly happy within this group, but she does find a certain amount of peace. In terms of Elaine's design, I wanted to go for full-on Victorian Gothic vampire influence for her character design. It seemed perfect for a straight-laced noblewoman, and some of the textures that you can get out of the pleating and draping in Victorian textiles I feel like emulates the look of a date pretty well. So obviously the visual inspiration of dates really comes across in the costume design that I did for her. The big old poofy sleeves that I gave her are kind of textured in the way that a date is. I used a lot of like round drapes and round shape language in the skirt to kind of look like a pile of dates in a bowl. It's pretty on the nose, but dates are kind of a weird fruit to work with in terms of inspiration for an outfit, so I took visual cues where I could. Batwing shapes were also obviously a big part of the composition of this outfit. The neckline is kind of designed to have that batwing pointed, rounded shape to it. I designed the bottom of the skirt kind of flaring out into a mermaid style in that same way, and I also of course gave her the iconic goth parasol, complete with some little date-inspired beading on that. I repeated similar beading throughout the skirt on the dress, and the buttons on the dress, and the little brooch around her neck, and for lack of a bat-inspired hairstyle, instead I gave her this sort of like Edwardian-inspired updo. I gave her 2 gray streaks that kind of mimic where bat ear placement would be, and also give her kind of a Bride of Frankenstein thing going on. Finally, I gave her some spooky little red glasses so that she can judge people from behind them. And with that, Elaine is done, but we still have one more character to go. And last but not least, I kind of snapped and did a little illustration of Hargreaves because he was just becoming too relevant to this whole narrative. So again, I apologize for the grotesque length of this video, but I just don't know how else to like get all of these dumb ideas across to you. Sorry. So Hargreaves, like I have established, is kind of a rat in bat's clothing. At the beginning of this whole timeline, he is one of the oldest existing vampires, and all of the other vampires in existence are sort of like very, very intimidated by him. He has an uncalculable kill count. He provokes conflict with other colonies, so much so that other colony members that he had in the past have left him. The only thing that would possibly mellow this vampire is the pursuit of children. This man is obsessed with legacy and reputation. That lack of legacy in the human world is his unfinished business, so he's convinced that he's gonna carry it out in this vampire reality that he now lives in. But Onslow Hargreaves, Onslow is his first name by the way, is also picky. He has certain ideas of what he would want his children to be like, and since he can only choose from a pool of fully grown adults, he's very selective about what kind of people they are. Whenever he stumbles across Eevee, he sees her as the perfect daughter because in many ways she is to her actual family. She's talented, kind, beautiful, and successful. She makes her family proud. And after Onslow turns her, she is basically the perfect daughter for him too, save for one little thing. Onslow didn't raise her. She's not technically his legacy. He didn't imprint any of his value or DNA on her. He wants someone that he can mold from adolescence to really become his child, and that's when he finds Ruby, and we know how that goes. After turning Ruby, he very quickly discovers that he is not at all above the rules. and he begins his devolving transformation into a gargoyle. At this point, of course, Eevee is tasked with fighting and killing him, because if she doesn't, he'll just continue to come after both her and Ruby, attempting to kill and feed on them. So she does. She fights him in his weakened, transformative state, and at the moment that she gets the upper hand, about to kill him, she hesitates. She just can't do it for whatever reason. And in that moment, she accidentally gives him the opportunity to feed on her. The idea, of course, is to kill a gargoyle mid-transformation whenever they're in a weakened state, before they have an opportunity to feed on anyone, because once they do, they will grow infinitely more powerful. After Hargreaves feeds on Eevee, he nearly drains her life force. It turns her once solid black hair white and nearly kills her. She has to retreat and run away with Ruby, leaving Gargoyle Hargreaves to grow more powerful and fight another day. This leaves Hargreaves as a gargoyle, now constantly trying to track them down, killing and feeding off other vampires along the way, and leaving other groups of vampires to speculate which colony didn't do their duty and slay a gargoyle. This basically puts our colony in the modern day constantly on the run as this nomadic group, and nobody besides Eevee and Ruby really know the reasons why they have to move around so much at first. They keep the fact that Hargreaves is still alive a secret, because trying to slay him now would probably be more dangerous than just trying to constantly run from him. And that is where we leave this group, a half vampire desperately trying to cling to her humanity, and the monster who sired her constantly in hot pursuit. Folks, it sounds like we've got an anime on our hands. Hello and welcome finally to the end of the video. I am very tired. I know that this was an awful lot. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how long this video is going to end up being, but it definitely spiraled out of control as I thought more about the characters and came up with ideas, and then also, you know, by extension ended up expanding the cast to include more characters. You would think that by now I would put limits on myself for this sort of thing, but you know, I haven't yet, so we'll see if that ever happens and develops. But with these videos lately, it has been my top priority to kind of think about the characters a little bit more and actually develop characters, because I think that is definitely the most important thing in informing character design if it's going to be for some kind of narrative project. And narrative projects are definitely where I see the trajectory of my art going, so in a lot of ways, working on these videos is sort of like practice for me, because as much as I want to tell narrative stories, I don't have a ton of experience doing that, so a lot of these are thought experiments. They're opportunities for me to think about characters and events and cause and effect and timelines and all the things that go into shaping a little story and universe like this. So that being said, I hope that you enjoyed all of my ramblings and thoughts and everything. This is probably the most complicated character design video that I've done so far whenever it came to the level of thought that I was trying to put into everything and the backstories and make everything work, especially with the new lore that I was kind of coming up with. Since this video had some darker themes with it, you know, that kind of goes with the territory whenever it comes to making vampire characters and treating them with any level of seriousness. I definitely wanted to try to think about them as much as I could. A week doesn't leave me with very much time to develop 6 characters, but I certainly tried to do my best. As usual, leave your fanfics in the comments. Feel free to speculate wildly about these characters. I will, of course, have high-resolution PSD and PNG files of the artwork available on my Patreon, as well as prints of these drawings available on my store. Thank you so much for checking those out if you do. I also want to extend a thank you to Kid Without Curfew on YouTube for allowing me to use their cover of Bullet with Butterfly Wings in this video. I'll have that linked below in the description if you want to check it out. They do super cool lo-fi remixes and covers of things. They also do original music, and their visual artwork is also super cool, so feel free to check that out if you would like to. But as always, most importantly, the biggest thank you for this video and all of my videos go to my patrons for supporting the content, and especially my executive producers. Seno Takai, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Samalama MC Samabama, Sarah, Crimson Moon 04, Liana, Ermler Jean, Anubix, Breeza, Sony, Brian, Phoenix, Rose Draconi, Freedom and Gusgus, Francesca Sliwa, Kat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent.Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Megan Penland, Enozine, India Gloom, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.